Assalamu alaikum, Maulana.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Shukran for joining us today,
No,
Alhamdulillah.
alhamdulillah, it's my absolute pleasure, alhamdulillah.
Maulana, today we're going to talk about the role of the Sharia Board, inshallah.
Inshallah.
But before we start, I think it's important, Maulana, we first discuss the engagement between the customer and the companies and so forth. What the roles are of the various individuals from the investment houses, the Sharia Board, the client, and the financial advisor.
I think that's a very important question, and it will also provide a great degree of clarity. So, a Sharia Board, the primary task of the Sharia Board is to ensure that the Sharia compliant products are actually Sharia compliant. So by way of example, I think one of the earliest Sharia compliant products would be Murabaha. It's a very simple product. So Murabaha, it comes from the word ribh. Ribh basically means to profit. So what would happen is the bank would purchase a property and resell it to the client at a profit. So let's say, for example, the bank purchases the property at R1,000,000. They take possession of the property, then they resell the property to the client, let's say at 1.5 million, over a period of, let's say, 15 to 20 years. Okay. So this mode of financing, yes, it is a debt financing. The Sharia Board would be responsible for ensuring that this product is Sharia compliant. And in simple terms, ensuring Sharia compliancy would first be that the undesirables are not to be found. And the undesirables from an Islamic perspective is very simple. They should not be riba. In other words, there should be no interest or any other form of riba. Okay. There should not be any gharar, in other words, contractual risk, or any of the other undesirables. For example, selling something that you have not taken possession of. We need to ensure that the bank takes possession of the property, and after having taken possession of the property, the bank resells it. So that is primarily the function of the Sharia Board, to ensure that the products are Sharia compliant. There's no Sharia undesirables. If you look at it broadly, if you look at the financial space, what do you find? You find that in the investment space now, what you would find is that there are an index of companies that they invest in. The Sharia Board must ensure that all of those companies on the index, that they are Sharia compliant. It may be that an asset management company wants to introduce a company into that particular index. The Sharia Board needs to verify, ascertain that that particular company which they want to introduce into the index needs to be Sharia compliant. And then there's a third function, which I think basically is a corollary of the first two functions, and that is basically advocacy. It's not really part of the Sharia Board's mandate per se, but somehow or the other you'd find that, like in Urdu they say, Jiska kana kata uska gana gata, the bird sings the song from where it eats. So if we're working in the industry, then obviously we're going to be promoting the industry. 100%. And it's very much like some people say that, promoting halal food. Promoting halal food, we espouse to halal. So therefore we will promote halal food. Likewise, we espouse to Islamic finance. So therefore we will advocate Islamic finance. And why that is important is because the Sharia Board is not responsible for the profitability or otherwise of a given product or a given investment. That's not the responsibility of the Sharia Board. That is the asset management. The asset managers, they take responsibility. They do their homework. They basically take the monies and they put it in an investment. And when they reach their goals in terms of the returns, They'll either maintain it or they'll basically cash in on it, and the profits will be distributed to the client. But that responsibility is not the responsibility of the Sharia board. That's the responsibility of the asset management.
Okay.
And many times people get their wires crossed in this particular regard. Let's go back to the first example, which was a simple example of a murabaha. So, is murabaha Sharia compliant? You'll go to the Sharia board and the Sharia board will tell you this is Sharia compliant. The fact that it is Sharia compliant doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea for you to go into this form of debt financing, despite the fact that it is Sharia compliant. You need now to possibly ask yourself, or if you don't have that capacity, then you need to speak to a financial advisor. Look here, this is my current situation. Is it financially advisable for me to actually incur this debt? Because it's a debt at the end of the day. And the financial advisor will be able to tell you, look here, you're able to, or you're unable to. It's not a good idea. Allah wanted to do space.
Shukran for that, Maulana. Maulana, with regards to the financing, just a question, because I think a lot of people ask this question. Is there a certain amount of profit that you can add when you're reselling a product? Or is there a limitation to what can be added onto that? I'm not sure if Maulana can answer that question.
No, 100%. Allah bless you. So, in other words, to maybe regurgitate the question or to simplify it would be, is there a ceiling to profit?
Correct.
In other words, like some people, you have them say that you can make profit, but you can't make 100% profit. 100% profit is the ceiling. You can't make beyond that. So, from an Islamic contract law, from an Islamic Sharia perspective, there's no ceiling to a profit. You can make as much profit as you possibly can. You can make as much profit as, not as much profit as you possibly can, but you can determine your own profit.
Okay.
Actually, now you're talking about that now. If you look at it from a broad perspective, contracts are basically divided into two. You have, let's call it trust, for lack of a better word, trust contracts, and then you have normal non-trust contracts. Uqud al-i'timan wa uqud ghayr al-i'timan. Two categories. So the normal contract, you are not obligated to disclose what your profit is. For example, if you go to any of the stores now, what's going to happen? You're going to purchase something. You know that the person that you're purchasing from, they bought this item at a particular price. They put a markup on there and now they're selling it to you. So they're selling it to you at cost plus profit. But they don't need to disclose their profit. They don't need to put on the label there that I bought it for 5 and I'm selling it to you for 10 and I'm selling it to you for 15. And they don't have to do that. That's a normal contract. Just something which came to mind because normally you don't even have to disclose the profit. However, if you go to a trust contract, for example, like Murabah, how we spoke about, where you tell the person, look here, I bought this item for R1,000,000 and I'm reselling it to you for 1.5. So what are you doing? You're disclosing the profit. So if it's a Murabaha, then you must disclose the amount of profit. And also, you can't be dishonest when it comes to the amount of profit that you're making. So the second one, sometimes the second type of trust contract would be that you go to somebody, the guy, you ask for a discount. The guy tells you, I can't give you a discount. I'm selling it to you at cost. So what is he telling you? That I bought it at this amount and I'm selling it to you at exactly the same amount. So it's a trust contract. If he's found to be dishonest, and then you can cancel the contract in that particular way. Sometimes people tell you, I'm selling it below cost. So these are all trust contracts. But trust contracts, that's an exception to the rule. Okay. Normally it is you just go and you purchase something, so you know at the back of your mind that there's profit in there, but the profit doesn't have to be disclosed. So number one, profit doesn't need to be disclosed, and also there's no ceiling to the profit. You can make as much profit. It is permissible for you to make as much profit, while people are encouraged not to make, like exorbitant profit and not to exploit. Exploiting people is something else altogether. So, the Sharia discourages that. But in terms of a ceiling to profit, there's no ceiling to profit.
Okay. Shukran for that, Maulana. Maulana, with regards to the Sharia Board, how many members does the Sharia Board normally consist of? Or how many individuals oversees the Sharia Board?
So you have different structures. In my experience, you have different structures. But generally, you would find that a minimum of 3 persons, 3 qualified scholars, would make up the Sharia Board. And I think you can understand why that would be, because sometimes decisions need to be taken. So with 3 persons, you can have a majority in that particular regard. And normally, what we find in today's time, and this is one of the benefits of having a Sharia board that comprises of at least 3 people, you have what they refer to as al-ilm al-jama'i, like collective knowledge. And also what we have in today's time, this whole idea of ijtihad, of original thinking, that we have a case, we need to apply ourselves to Quran in the way of the Prophet and create a solution. Now, in times gone by, this capacity would rest with a single individual. He's able to apply himself and come to a ruling. Or in other words, you able to produce Allah's ruling in this particular matter. Now what happens is that sort of ability which rests with one person now rests with the group. So you have like al-ijtihad al-jama'i, collective type of applying oneself. And this is facilitated when you have a Sharia board with 3 persons thereon. That everybody comes with the expertise, and that collective expertise put together, it generates in most instances a solution. So it's not one person, it's a minimum of 3 people. And sometimes what happens is, not sometimes, in quite a bit of instances, what we have is, especially when the structure, depending on what part of Islamic finance you're dealing with. So for example, in insurance, what you would have is, you would have the waqf, which is established, and then you have a Sharia board which oversees the waqf. But then you have 3 other qualified scholars who serve as trustees. So the Sharia board oversees the day-to-day functioning and Sharia compliance, rather, not operation, but Sharia compliance of the waqf, and then the trustees oversee the entire setup. Okay. So in that particular instance, what do you have now? You're going to have a minimum now of 6 persons overseeing and ensuring that there is Sharia compliance. So alhamdulillah, it's a structure that works very, very, very well, alhamdulillah. And it's not a superficial type of Sharia compliance that is ascertained. It is an essential Sharia compliance that is maintained. And therefore, the Sharia products essentially and fundamentally in terms of its structure differs from its counterpart, from its conventional counterpart.
Yeah. Okay, alhamdulillah. Shukran for that, Maulana. Maulana, so correct me if I'm wrong, Maulana. I think it's important for us and the community then to understand that the Sharia board is just to oversee that the company functions and that they adhere to the Sharia law in the way they conduct the business. But the day-to-day operations, that falls within the asset manager, if we're using an investment company for as an example, that the asset manager is responsible for the day-to-day runnings of that business, whether they make a profit or make a loss. Because I think it's so important that we need to understand the risk attached to anything that we do in business, especially when it comes to investments, Maulana.
Look, from the Sharia board side, the solution is not an atomistic solution, it is a holistic, comprehensive solution, and from A to Z. So the Sharia board will ensure that Sharia compliant products from A to Z, to the best of their ability, accords to Sharia law, and will impress upon the asset management that in order for Sharia compliance to be had, these are the steps that needs to be adhered to. However, when it comes to financial decisions in terms of to buy in, buy out, when to buy, when to sell, how much to buy, how much to sell, in other words, the whole idea of the entrepreneurial part of things, when to invest and when to divest, that is the responsibility of, like in the example that of the asset management. And the Sharia board doesn't take responsibility for that simply because it doesn't form part of its mandate. The Sharia board, and uniquely, subhanAllah, the Sharia boards are very developed. Even if you look at the term in terms of the names, they say Sharia Advisory Committee. And those are not willy-nilly chosen. It's chosen for a particular reason in order to speak to the functionality of the Sharia board, and also what its mandate is and what its mandate is not, what it's responsible for and what's not responsible. I think, people, if you look at it from a flip side, when you have a particular Sharia compliant investment that is not doing too well, people tend to complain, and I think that's almost like an understood reaction to when a given product is not doing well. But at the same time also, it's telling of the fact that it's Sharia compliant. Because if it wasn't Sharia compliant, then you'd have had guaranteed returns. Like in the money market, if it's interest based and it was, what do they call those things now? Debt, bonds and etc. So the fact that the fund, oscillates between profit and loss is actually indicative of the fact that this particular fund is
Sharia
compliant. Look, for me, at the end of the day, also, what I would love to have in terms of clients that are buying into Sharia compliant funds, to sort of have the proper Islamic philosophy about about wealth in general. That in terms of wealth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one, قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِي الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتَنْزِعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ. It's important, and I think the Muslim client would have an advantage over other because they come with the proper ethos and philosophy. Yes, the expectancy is that the asset manager and the money that you placed in the hands of the asset manager is what we refer to as amanah, a trust. He needs to work with it diligently, and if he doesn't, then he's going to be penalized for it. But before we get to that point, you as a Muslim client understand that the asset manager can do his best, but ultimately, the growth and the loss of wealth lies with Allah. قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ. Allah is the ultimate owner. قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِي الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ. Ya Allah, you give wealth to whom you please. وَتَنْزِعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ. And you remove it. And if you wanted to, you can say it to lower it. You know, the Prophet maybe with at that percentage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one ultimately, the ultimate causer, the ultimate one who brings things into existence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So with that type of ethos, I think that the Muslim client as a player, he's already at an advantage because he's going to do his best, but he also knows that the outcome here lies in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when he loses in terms of the investment, he doesn't lose himself. I'm just talking from because it can happen to you whether you're in a professional investment or formal investment or not. It can happen in your business. The same sort of attitude needs to apply. And that attitude basically, what does it do? It takes the pressure off from us. That ultimately wealth belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees that wealth to grow. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cause all of our wealth to grow. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala place blessing in our wealth. So basically to conclude, the thing is that managing the funds in terms of managing it in a way that generates a return, that's not the responsibility of the Sharia Board. That's the responsibility of the asset managers. The responsibility of the Sharia Board is to ensure Sharia compliance. And mashallah, one of the qualities that you find that I've witnessed in terms of the Sharia Board, they have this quality of goodwill. The Sharia boards want what is best for all of the players involved, for the asset management, for the client, for everybody. Even when we look at, not only that, but we look at our country. Why is it? Because we have a duty towards our fellow neighbors, and our neighbors, according to one, is everybody in the country. So when a Muslim operates, his frame of mind is that I want to do something that will add positivity not only to my workspace but and to my local economy, but to the broader economy as well, because of the haqqul jiwa, because he's a neighbor and he's a citizen here. So that's the type of attitude that you have. It's alhamdulillah.
So in essence, Maulana, it's the financial advisor needs to explain the risk attached to the different investments so that the client can actually understand it. It's not the Sharia Board's responsibility, if I can say that, Maulana, because if you look at it in retrospect, you get different asset classes or different types of funds. You get a low risk, medium risk, and high risk. No. So I would say it's important that the financial advisor explains that to the client, so when they do invest the money, they know the risk that is attached to it.
No, 100% out, and that's why not everybody is qualified to give financial advice. You actually need to have a certain qualification with which, or by virtue of which, to give that advice. So I think you've articulated that very well.
And I'd also say to the listeners that it's also important to look at the credibility of the institutions that they invest their money with, because I'm not sure if I start a company with good intentions, but I don't have any credibility, but I go to a Sharia board and I say, look, I want to start a Sharia compliant company, and the Sharia board does the Sharia board do a due diligence on me, or do they take it as a trust contract?
Look, I would think that it's a matter of a norm that when you engage with somebody, that person needs to have a degree of credibility before you engage with the person. So my understanding would be that a Sharia board would first check the credibility of somebody before they associate with that particular person. So yes, the responsibility of the Sharia board is basically just to ensure the compliance that's on its place. But I think just naturally, you wouldn't deal with anybody. You would first want to be given the assurances that this person is a trustworthy person before you deal with them. So in this particular regard, just naturally, like you would check out the credentials of a person before engaging with the person. Likewise, the Sharia board, it is becoming it would be necessary for them to check out the credibility of the company before engaging with the company.
Okay. Shukran for that, Maulana.
Marhaban.
It's always exciting to have a conversation with Maulana. Alhamdulillah.
Allah bless you and
Shukran for
increase you in goodness. Jazakumullah khairan. I think you forgot maybe some of the questions, but we will leave it for the next time, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Allah bless you. Barakallah feekum. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Shukran, Maulana.